Hello, and welcome to another installment of our Just Transitions podcast series. My name is Brad Handler. I'm a senior fellow with the Payne Institute. I'm very pleased to be speaking today with Cain, Chief Executive Officer of the Latrobe Valley Authority of Victoria, Australia. The LVA was established in late 2016 to coordinate Victorian government support for the Latrobe Valley following the announced closure of the Hazelwood Power Station. In other words, the LVA is helping the Latrobe Valley execute a just transition for workers and the broader community, and helping the region lay the foundation for transitioning to a diversified economy. In this first segment, we're going to discuss the scope, authority, organization, and some of the key operating principles of the LVA. So welcome, Karen, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Brad. It's a pleasure to be talking with you today.
Really appreciate it. So, let's do some table setting here. What was the mandate when the LVA was established? What was its breadth? What was the intended time frame for its existence?
So the Latrobe Valley Authority is a state administrative authority of the state government of Victoria, and was established by the Premier's office. So that's the head of the state government here in 2016. And we were established by the Department of Premier and Cabinet's office. And I think that's very important to note, because this is the head of the state government here, making a commitment to the community of the Latrobe Valley for support following the closure of the first coal-fired power station in the Latrobe Valley, where most of the state's electricity has been generated for decades. So the mandate was pretty strong, and I think what was also important about that establishment was work done prior to the establishment of the authority to have a look at contemporary responses to these sorts of changes, significant changes in a community. And I think the fundamental approach here was to really think differently about how a government agency could operate in a community, different to what the traditional public service response is, I would say. So I think being able to be creative about what we were set up to do, to have the resources available to be creative and flexible, and to design the work according to the needs on the ground and be in place on the ground was a really important mandate for us.
So you're making it sound like all of that, or much of that, was established up front. In other words, a great deal of authority and a great deal of latitude to shape the LVA as you needed to shape it. Fair to say?
Yes. And I think having access to very senior people in a state government to influence and to be able to explain and demonstrate, and a lot of I suppose expectation. I mean, this was a huge undertaking for a team of people, and a lot riding on this as well. But I think being able to demonstrate that if you have an organisation placed in a community and working side by side and understanding the reality on the ground about what is happening in time, and being able to be flexible enough for quick turnaround responses and rethinking an approach was a wonderful opportunity, but also absolutely necessary in the end. We realised how important that was. The other really important part of this, in terms of the level of authority and giving the community a very strong message about the state government's support, was that the Premier, the head of state government, set up a reporting committee of ministers, which I reported to. So that was really important, a very strong messaging about how important this work is. They also set up what's called an interdepartment committee, which is state government departments, senior people coming together to talk about how all of the state government departments would work to support work on the ground in this community. So education, health, jobs and business departments, justice, all of the state departments required to come together to talk about their commitment to this work as well. So in terms of other reporting, we also provided a quarterly report, which we still do, based on, all of the programs that we've been talking about but particularly focusing on jobs and the economy, community sentiment, community social networking, a whole lot of infrastructure. And as the work has progressed and expanded, we've expanded that quarterly report to reflect all of the work on the ground.
Understood. From a spending authority and a spending decision standpoint, where does that balance lie? Be as specific as you're comfortable being, I guess, but where does that balance lie in terms of them saying, yep, you go do what you need to do versus you need to get approval from us to go spend a certain amount of money?
I think one of the great design principles of this authority was to provide me as the CEO quite a high level of delegation in terms of decision making for funding expenditure, but it wasn't totally open. Don't forget, we're a public agency with public funds, and so absolutely due diligence on expenditure from the public purse is up front and centre in terms of systems and processes and ability to sign off on those decisions. So whilst I had a degree of delegation and probably enough to be able to do the really quick turnaround things, there were still areas of delegation that went right through to very senior people in government that I couldn't sign off on. We're talking, large figures here. But again, working in the Department of Premier and Cabinet, because of the desire to make sure that we did the very best we could, we got a lot of support and quick turnaround decisions. Very, very important. So our direct line of support was very close, and that was a really important part here. And I might come back to that because we've since moved. That was for the first 4 years, and we've since moved in the last 12 months to another department, and that's not our experience anymore.
Well, that may actually be the segue anyway to the next question. Is when we had spoken in the past, we talked a little bit about how the government had been stable, and it sounds like in many ways the authority set had been stable. And I was hoping you could speak to a little bit of how important it was that the government in Victoria was stable versus maybe how much had been institutionalized, put into the book, so to speak, such that it was immune from political dynamics, if you will.
Look, again, a really good question. And we always knew that what we did on the ground, what we demonstrated our worth and our purpose would be, the legacy of the work we have undertaken would be absolutely key to bipartisan support. Bipartisan support has been really important. So that has taken time. So as you can imagine, in any political scenario with different political parties, there's always politics around agencies that are set up by one government versus another and how that's seen. Sure. But we've just had a really good test for that. So we've just been having a look at this year's current budget, and that's been out in the public, and we've had fantastic bipartisan support from the political scene right across the spectrum. And for me, that's the real test. So the value of apolitical work, which it has to be in a community with which the focus on community and for benefit of community is the most important message here. And if the community is seeing the benefit, then that's what will drive decision making.
I think that's a great sort of context for us. Let's dig in a little bit more to some specifics. I guess I'll probably start with, you've had a very distinct staged approach, or the LVA's had a distinct staged approach, right? First, it was the immediate response, then it was recovery and capacity building, and I'd say now you're into sort of your strategic and sustainable growth planning phase and even some execution phase, I'm sure, which includes some smart specialization. Maybe just you're obviously going to describe some of that for us as we work our way through, but was the groundwork for that multi-staged approach laid very early on? Was that part of the original assumption that you would work in those phases, or did you just kind of jump in and figure it out?
I think we jumped in and figured it out, and I don't say that lightly. I think part of a really important tenet for us at the very, very beginning of our work was to very quickly understand the immediate need. And again, this is a really important tenet because it's not what we think the community needs, it's learning about what is needed. So the quick work with the announcement of the closure of the mine, we had 4 months before the mine closed.
Right.
But obviously, as soon as that announcement was made, there was a lot of uncertainty, anger, upset, you name it, all of the things that happen when a large employer in a community that's been there for generations, that has had families reliant on for a long time, that's a big shock to a community, and people did not understand it. So our immediate response the day we opened was to actually go to workers immediately. So working with the company that owned the mine, on the ground, out at the site, working with the local unions, really, really quickly getting in and doing a lot of listening and understanding. So that was really important work with a dedicated team of people to do that. So we had set that team up with that very purpose. And what that does is you go in and understand the context in the first instance, and you don't make assumptions and you don't make judgments, but you then start to think about how you facilitate a group of people to have an idea and not just an idea, but a real sense of support. So we're an open door organisation. We had workers coming through the door on the day that the closure was announced, saying, "What are you going to do for me?" So really, really important to understand what people were looking for, but a very importantly trained team of people who understand all of the emotion that goes with that. It's not just an economic issue here. This is about society. This is about people. This is about families. This is about very, very, the complexity of society here.
Of course.
So gathering all of that information then over time enables you to understand what's needed, but also the other half of our job is to find quality services and quality information and quality support. That's the job.
I think I understand. Maybe you can give us a sense of how much flexibility, how much authority versus reporting obligation and approval obligation you have.
Yeah, I think a very good question. And what I haven't talked about are two things. There were some already established programs as part of the funding for the authority, which the government had pre-organised. So things like reimbursement of state government taxes for businesses in the community to stimulate the economy, some funding available for supply chain businesses who were impacted by the closure of this mine, and providing funds for businesses to understand where their future might be and do some planning for that. So there were some already established funds and programs right up front. A program to support businesses to employ people, unemployed people, a back to work scheme it was called. So a number of those in place upfront immediately, which we administered, which we managed. But in addition to that, we were able to design really purposeful, responsive programs on the ground, and I can come to that a little bit later. So just to your question about gathering all of that information then over time enables you to understand what's needed, but also the other half of our job is to find quality services and quality information and quality support. That's the job.
Yes. And for our listeners, we're going to wind up spending a little bit of time on both that training support side as well as creating the opportunities and finding the opportunities in a little bit. So now you're an educator by background. I don't know how much industrial organization type of background you have, but as I mentioned, you did, and it's now become a fairly formal process where it was immediate response, and then you move forward. Tell us a little bit. How did you even sort of understand that framework to build up that framework? Or,
Oh, look,
yeah, go ahead.
I think, Brad, I think it came naturally, and you learn about paying attention to, just doing some forward paying attention to the horizon here is really important work. So the more we learnt about what people might have been looking for, we went into a recovery phase fairly early on to try and understand where the gaps and the opportunities were. So we're hearing from workers, we're hearing from their families, we're understanding what they were looking for beyond work at the mine. And again, it's really interesting when we talk about just transition. There's sometimes an assumption that everybody just wants to stay in the industry that they're in. Well, that wasn't the case. Some people did, some people didn't. Some people just took the opportunity to retire. Some people took the opportunity to start something entirely new in their life, a new business. Some people wanted to work in an area that they had thought about previously, and we supported them to do that. But the more we learned, the more we then understood, well, where are those opportunities? So part of our work then into recovery was to understand where the jobs growth was in the community. So where in the community are jobs growing? What are those jobs? What skills are required? So we started to work very directly with industry to say, can you tell us about your job projection? What sort of skills are you looking for? And so we started a program called Access New Industries. Came right off the back of this knowledge about what workers were looking for, and the gap between what they were looking for and what was out there became really important for us to close.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. You've effectively answered my next question already, but I guess I want to emphasize the point, because just to bring in a little bit of historical context, the government, if you will, but the Victorian government had been somewhat of a disappointment to the Latrobe Valley for many years prior to the beginning of the LVA. Please correct me if I'm misspeaking in some way, but I do sense that there was a profound level of mistrust and disappointment within the valley for state government efforts, right, or government efforts in general. I guess I'm hoping you can speak to how much of a hurdle that was. I think, again, you've addressed it in the sense that you've said you really sat down and you listened. But how were you able to persuade people that had been disappointed by promises made and not kept in the past that this time was indeed different?
A very good question, and again, I think the mandate we were given was to address that. And look, I've worked and lived in Latrobe Valley for 26 years now, and I worked in public service in education. So I had experienced all forms of government approaches during that time. And I mean, we're not talking any particular political party here. We're talking about a community. Probably initially, the big change occurred with the privatisation of the power industry here over 20 years ago, and that from that point onwards, it became very difficult in this community. So, and a number of task forces have been put together. Not much progress had been made. A number of short-term programs, not much had changed. So you're absolutely right in terms of sentiment. What's going to be different this time? Now, we were not in the game of making promises to people. Our approach here was, well, actually, we need to understand what we need to do first, and we need to work with you, and we needed to have some really quick wins around that. So you can't just talk; you actually have to act. So we've always talked about this our transition workers actions, not plans. So where do you go to first? We went to workers and training, and that was a really good piece. And again, partnership. So one of the really important aspects of our work is collaboration and partnership, and bringing agencies together, which we support, to find solutions, joint solutions. So the worker transition service, the support for workers, was built around a partnership model that brought training organisations together, employment agencies together, unions together in a way that had never been done before. And so the solutions are in the hands of organisations and people in the community. It's not us telling people what to do.
We're tapping into local organizations in one
That's right.
form or another that existed.
That's right.
Okay.
So what you start to demonstrate is a different way of working and really being respectful of the expertise and the knowledge and the passion for community that those organisations have. And then working with them, they do the work, basically. Right. And they the sense of pride in contributing to, you know, the support for workers and families is really important, playing a role.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. All right. Thank you for all of that. I think that forms a great introduction. Let's move on to some of the specific things you've done with respect to worker support and training and economic diversification. And we're bouncing a little bit back and forth, and I think that's okay. We're going to cover that in a separate podcast, and I hope you all join us.